Right, okay, no, we'll jump straight into it. There was a bit of coaching debate. Now, Kingy, you can't. So David King, our mate, who I reckon is one of the best game analysis people in the caper.
Agree.
But he did pot commit to Chris Scott v Chris Fagan and ended up having to or sort of sit through that and see that, and has sort of inserted himself in the middle of that. But then obviously Longmire and Hinkley. So we had four coaches that have been well pulled apart, well speculated on. I want to come back to, in fact, what coaching is, because it's conservative versus interventionist in terms of your match day demeanour and your match day manner, and Fags is definitely a conservative coach in that regard, and Chris Scott's probably more on the interventionist side and you know, moving the magnets and making things happen.
So when you say conservative, Fagan more likely to sit back and let things unfold and let his players sort of work out matchups and work out things and not insert himself into changing things, whereas Chris Scott's more likely to make moves in-game.
Yeah, I think that's the way it's been perceived. So we see it as but see, you can look at it the other way. Say, well, Fagan trusts and Chris Scott intervenes. So, but that's they're too polarising, all of those statements, because coaching is more than just match day as well. But as it stood, the Lions got the job done in a fantastic game, and both coaches did a great job in my mind. But after the game, Chris Fagan was absolutely wrapped with his charges, as you would have expected.
The way those boys have gone about it and just stuck to their guns is, they got a reward tonight. If you had have said to me at the halfway mark of the season we're going to be playing in the grand final at the end of the year, I probably would have said you're crazy. But here we are, and we've got an opportunity. Yeah, we enjoyed tonight.
I think it is a matter of language. Kingy said last week, you can coach brilliantly and lose, and you can coach poorly and win, and that is a reality. But the word coaching then suggests that it's all about match day. Being a senior coach in the past myself, I would suggest that up to about 10% of coaching is match day tactics and maybe plan B's and C's and anything that you want to do. You've still got to get your match day matchups right, and I think that Chris Fagan and the Brisbane Lions team do it well as any. So what where the debate's been hijacked a little bit is that the criticism has come about Chris Fagan's coaching. It's not actually about his coaching at all. I think Kingy's talking about his ability to make shifts in match and his tactics that he takes in against a specific opposition. And I'm speaking for Kingy on that behalf. But it's not actually Chris Fagan's coaching as general that he has criticised, because the problem is that the language has actually been hijacked a little bit, because Chris Fagan is an excellent coach. He's an excellent man manager. He sets his team up, he sets his players up, he sets his club up as well as anyone, and he's done an exceptional job. 4 of the last 5 prelims, and now into their second grand final. Chris Scott is an excellent coach also, but he's 3-6 in prelims from 9 prelims. Fagan's now 2-2. Longmire is 5-1 from 6 prelims. That's an excellent return from prelims, but he's 1-3 in grannies going into this week. John Longmire. So the coaching speculation, the coaching debate, and I'm sure Kingy will be asked about a little bit in review and going forward into next week. But I think it's hijacked a little bit by the actual language. When Kingy talks about someone coaching, we've got to be clear that he has been talking about match day coaching, which is in fact a small part of the role and job of a senior coach.
So too much emphasis on
tactics
on game day.
Which Kingy is more than qualified to give his opinion on. What it's very difficult for Kingy to give his opinion on is what a senior coach is doing for the majority of his job, which is to set up the environment, to set up the culture, to give the players belief, to build the development of that club and of the program. And I think Chris Fagan, in all measures, has succeeded in that.
So tell me about I'm hijacking your buck stops here a little bit, but I heard you pre-game speak about, and this is where I think he actually did outcoach Chris Scott on the day. I thought he had a good day. I thought the Brisbane coaching group, now that would be the guys upstairs mainly as well as Chris on the bench, You said under 100 marks, basically you beat them. You beat Brisbane. Now, the rain's coming down at the start of the game. I'm going, well, this is set up perfectly for Geelong with the form that they're in, the way that they controlled that space against Port Adelaide, the way that they were able to move the football. For Brisbane to take 111 and use and own the corridor the way that they did and go into a bit more chaos mode, wasn't it? Particularly in that third term. You remember Zorko just playing on and handballing from kickouts down the boundary line. But their ability to go back through the middle of the ground. Why wasn't Geelong able to shut that down in those conditions?
Well, Geelong haven't been as good defensively, and that's a reality. They haven't been. They haven't been the defensive side that we've known of them from the past. They've had to give up some of that to become more aggressive offensively. And you remember when they, 69 inside or 63 inside 50s against Sydney. They score over 100 points, and the whole rhetoric there was, we just want to get the ball forward because we believe we've got a forward line that can beat any opposition back six, and we're just going to score. It was very similar to the way that they've played their best footy this year. They've actually gone forward really solidly, and their forwards got offside, and they weren't able to defend the middle of the field. Now, Brisbane had some handball change, yes, but they largely set it up because they were composed and changed angles and moved the Geelong defence, and Geelong could not. The centre square was as open as you'll ever see it in a game of footy.
It's a final in those conditions.
Geelong's team defence was really poor. That was really poor, especially in the third quarter, and that was where Brisbane were able to get them.
So
they took 100 uncontested marks, Brisbane, so they actually got exactly right on 100.
So you're talking uncontested marks.
Yeah.
So do they need more credit than what they perhaps get? Because if that was, I think even Robbo wrote this in the Herald Sun, if that was Chris Scott that had turned around a 25-point deficit and did it the way they did it in that third quarter, he would be getting all the credit. But for the 10% of coaching that you're speaking about, have Brisbane got enough credit for that performance? I thought they were terrific.
Oh, I agree. I don't think there's that much, I suppose, ultimate knowledge. I think the way we measure a senior coach and his impact on team, I think it's skewed. It's skewed too much to match day, and we are responsible for that. The commentary around it skews whatever everyone thinks of it. I think there's too much belief that from a coach's box or from sitting on the sideline there, that a coach can push a button and change it all. There is an attitude and there is an energy that a coach gets across, but it's largely done through the week. It's largely done in preparation through a season before you get to September. And I think, as I said, on those measures, Chris Fagan's done a fantastic job.
And their ability to deal with the Oscar McInerney ruck situation, that didn't really hurt them. I thought clearly the Leicester matchup on Jeremy Cameron was a big one as well.
Now you are starting to move into it because we're moving into
Sorry.
So the second one I want to go to is in the last quarter to recognise that the Lions back six held up so well. We talk about their offense and they kicked 11 goals in the second quarter, but the Lions back six and their defensive structures in the back half held up so well to be able to get them that win. And when the final siren came, it was done not necessarily just with their offense and their ability to finish, but their ability to hold up against the Geelong side who really challenged them in that fourth quarter.
Manna has a look forward. He goes on a run. The Lions are going back to the grand final. That is heart and soul. That is blood, guts. That is faith and loyalty right there. The Lions with an epic preliminary final comeback.
Great call there by Jared, but yes, the Lions had to withstand a weight of territory against in the last quarter. The game might have looked like it was going up and back and it was seesawing and it was nearly 50-50, but the reality was, especially in that first half of that quarter, Geelong had the lion's share of territory. 65% of the last quarter was in Geelong's front half.
22 entries to 8.
22 inside 50s to 8. But having said that, they didn't kick their first goal until Ollie Henry took that mark and kicked the left footer around the corner with about 5.5 minutes to go there. So, and once again, this is the match day coaching. Brisbane was sieving Geelong through the middle of the field. So rather than try and hold that up Geelong decided to play a 7th. So Blitzhavs would start in the ruck, and they knew that Joe Danaher was now rucking as well, so there might be a chance that he just slides forward. But Blitzhavs actually played as a 7th, so they played with an extra defender. And Brisbane didn't get through until the Archie, the Cameron kick over to Archie. Yeah. So they changed the angles and Bailey went through. Blitzhavs got drawn up. This was 11.5 minutes to go in the last quarter. Blitzhavs got drawn up onto Geelong's half-forward line for the first time the entire quarter. Other than he'd been sitting back and patrolling the back half and made it more difficult for the Lions to find that target in the attacking mid that they'd been able to score from. So tactically, it was an excellent call. But then again, Brisbane were able to respond to that. They only went inside the 8 times. They kicked 4 goals, 1, and they were ruthless with the way that they finished. But the Lions' back 6 was huge. Their smalls. I love Starcevic and Answorth, and they can play on talls and smalls. They're excellent defenders, and I thought they kept Stengel and Myers. Even though Myers had a great game, I thought there were at key moments Starcevic was able to keep a hold on him. Wilmot and Manor was the other one. Wilmot and Manor was another matchup. Zorko was on Close for the most part, and when Close got away, and Zorko probably switched off a couple of times at stoppage.
He's an issue for them, Zorko.
Well, he's had the ball 32 times.
I know.
He's got sieved at stoppage, but then he gave that kick away.
It's the full experience. It's the full Zorko. 2 weeks in a row where I thought he was poor in the first half last week. I thought he had some really ordinary moments throughout this game. But you do take the good with the bad. But I think he needs to be better. He needs to be better defensively, and he needs to be better with his decision making on Saturday if Brisbane are going to win.
Well, Leicester was massive against Jeremy Cameron and his positioning, and then his intercept marking. So we'll laud Harris Andrews for his intercept marking, but Ryan Lester's become as crucial a player to the Lions setup as any, because not only does he take that mark, but he pops that next kick out. So he's a mix of a Tom Stewart and a Tall. So he's got that ability. Mind you, Tom Stewart was brilliant down the other end. His last quarter was excellent in itself. That chase down tackle and some of his rebound play that really set up Geelong. But and then you've got Andrews and Payne, who Andrews was probably. Ollie Henry was the one that got away, especially late in those last 2 goals.
Yeah, worried about Payne.
Oh, he had some good moments late. Yeah. Obviously, that chase down tackle, and a couple of times when he actually was able to bring ball to ground when he was out of position. He's I understand why you're worried about him.
I just reckon he's sore.
Well, it doesn't matter anymore. Their matchup, they're going to match up really well against the Sydney forward line, which we're talking about this offense. They both kicked 95 points to the grand final teams in the prelims, but it's going to be as much of how you defend each other than how you attack.
Just one more word on Brisbane for point 3.
Yeah, I think that just looking a little bit forward as well, Oscar McInerney is going to be a fair bit of a loss. And then on the Sydney side, we will have conversations about Callum Mills. And I think Sydney will come out and address that really early. I think it's better to do it.
Out early?
I think so. Yeah, I think that's more likely than not. But if they don't do that in the next 24 hours, well, then he might actually be a life chance to get up. But Danny Daly had this to say last night around Oscar McInerney and his involvement in the Lions grand final week.
Yeah, he'll come down with us. He's pretty keen to come down with us on Wednesday and be part of it all, and we're pretty keen to have him as the players are. So he'll basically do everything with us apart from training and playing, unfortunately. But he's been an integral part of our success this year. So we want to keep him involved as long as he wants to be involved.
In terms of Millsy, clearly, he's coming off a hamstring injury. He had about 10 days ago. He had a good little session yesterday, Friday morning, and we'll see how he progresses. And then John and the match committee have got to make that hard call.
One thing that I will say, has an organisation in the Lions handled a key player's loss with any more calm and it's just matter of fact. And I just think that once again that comes back down to the senior coach in the organisation and how he expects it to be run. He's just gone, well, if you've had a double dislocation, it's and you haven't been able to get through the prelim, you're not going to play in the granny, are you? And to be so, it's not ruthless. It's because he's got great empathy, Fags, but to be so matter of fact about it, it just you imagine that flooding through and over the team through the leadership, and that's just the way you carry yourself. You go, well, you don't worry about the things you can't control, and you attack the things that you can. Oscar McInerney's been huge. If you look at the hit-outs throughout the season, I think he's 800 or something, and then you've got you've got something. I don't think anyone else is over 100 hit-outs in terms of that, and we know how important ruckman can be for momentum when you get into big finals. But they were able to withstand his the fact that he wasn't there for the second half. Joe Danaher stood up. The Lions they did really well despite not having him around.
One word answers only to this question: does Mills get ruled out by Tuesday?
No, I don't think so. I think they'll keep that open.
That was more than one word. That was more than one word. And does Oscar McInerney deserve a premiership medal if Brisbane win?
Yes. John Longmire was really happy with his charges. They were clinical. Great. An equal mix of class and patience and application to task. It's already been speculated or it's been reported around the way they exited their D50, and Port Adelaide kept Hawthorn to 60 uncontested marks, and Hawthorn have been a side that have been able to make the ground big and stretch defences and then be able to kick through you and run through you. But and they were able to do that in the semi-final at Adelaide Oval to beat Hawthorn. But Sydney took 117 uncontested marks. So we're talking about two teams that will come up against one another next week that have controlled the ball as well as any, that have used their foot skills more than their handball to be able to open the ground up and then trigger hands to be able to access their forwards. Sydney went 39 defensive rebounds. They went into their forward 50 15 times, which is over a third of the time, which is a huge result. You don't often see those sort of numbers, and they kicked 3 goals too from D50 rebounds. So it was brilliant. Their ball use, it brought their multiple forward threats into play. But once again, their back 6 or 7 can handle whatever offence that they're going to face. Cunningham on Rioli was a great call. He's a dangerous player. They weren't able to move the ball quite as effectively, Port Adelaide, and when they accessed their forwards, they were often kicking to a pack that it wasn't that dangerous. So, Sydney in great shape going into next week.
What about the 2022 Grand Final and the disaster that it was for them? I remember speaking to players after that, it might have been Luke Parker, about how they reviewed that performance and how they went about that, but they did it forensically at the time, and they looked at it all. They looked at the week leading up to it. They've spoken about it since, just about, and John said that they're about living in the moment and taking it, as cliche as it is. But any scars for that start to that game in 2022 for a lot of those players that were there? Yeah,
but it's healed up now.
It's healed?
Yeah, absolutely it is. And we'll see evidence of how well it's healed, and whether there's any weak spots, because the Lions will press. I mean, I think these two sides come into, we probably would have said this about Sydney Geelong in 22, but when you look back, that Sydney side, I think there's 7 players different from that 22 grand final that were in the prelim side. Geelong actually had 9 players different from their 22 premiership team in the weekend's preliminary final. But I think those wounds heal, and if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And I think the Sydney side are more ready to perform on the big stage than they were 2 years ago. They spoke about connection. Luke Parker spoke about connection and going into themselves, and that they've worked over the last couple of years through Emma Murray and her expertise at being able to connect in those fierce moments, to be able to go to each other and check in with each other rather than going into yourself. And Luke Parker spoke about that a couple of weeks ago. Ironically, when they got flogged by Port Adelaide and had that rough run, through the late part of the year, Emma Murray was over at the Olympics in Paris working with her athletes over there. So whether it's coincidence or not, her settling energy and her focus and control was not there through that period for the Swans, but I've got no doubt that the work they've done has bulletproofed them going into this week a little better. Ken Hinkley there speaking after the preliminary final loss.
Satisfy the Port Adelaide fans? Paying for blood?
Never does. No. Never does, because once you Once you dehumanise a person, and I think Ken Hinkley's been absolutely dehumanised, and it happens often with senior coaches. I mean, Chris Fagan, we see now, we can see he's very human. I think Chris got the way he carried himself after Sam Mitchell with his emotion after Hawthorn lose. You actually, if you can cut through the veneer of this is what I expect of you as a professional, or this is how much as a supporter I want us to win and we've lost and I blame you, which happens. There's a human under that's fallible. No senior coach is perfect, no person is perfect. But I thought that for Ken to try and bring it back to the program, to the bigger unit, I think is right. But I mean, Port Adelaide, they qualified well. They won 8 of their last 9. They beat Sydney by 112. They beat Freo by 20 points in the last round. They beat the Bulldogs by 48 points there with the same squad that they went in, minus Houston and Farrell. So they missed out on, Houston, who's probably their best player. Even when you look at their midfield scope and the stars through there, I think Houston is probably the most important player to Port Adelaide. So list management's going to be important in that shape going forward. But Zerk Thatcher, who is he's a battler, but he played some good footy. Burton, who was overlooked, throughout most of the year. Evans, Jones, who had a real crack and had a real good semi-final. Boak, who had a poor final series. Dixon, who's been banged up and couldn't really give as much. Radigalea, who started as a key defender, ends up as a key forward. Narkle and Evans. You've got, so what are there? There's 9 names.
How have they done
what they've done?
And that's my point.
Is that not coaching?
Exactly, and that's what I've said the whole time. Coaching is about maximising what you've got and getting the best performance out of, maximising essentially the potential of those players on your list. And that's what they did to finish second with that group. Now, that's not going to absolve them for the last 11 years prior to that, and Ken's been there for a long time and had great opportunities. So I fully understand that, and at some point there will need to be a new voice and a change, which the club has been thinking about for the best part of 2 seasons. He's got 1 year to go. David Koch is committed to that. How they play that from a leadership point of view in the off-season, do they formally announce Josh Carr is going to take over at the end of 2026? I don't know, but all I'm saying is that they had really no right to be beating Hawthorn with that group of players, and they were clearly, unless something extraordinary went on, going to go to Sydney and beat Sydney with that group. So list management is the most important thing now. With not a lot of draft picks that they've got, how are they going to bolster the depth of this list that was clearly found out? I mean, Sydney just roll another one in. Robbie Fox comes in if Mills is out. They've got Adams still waiting in the wings. There's players everywhere. Same with Brisbane this week. Same with Geelong, with the amount of players. Like Tui didn't play in that game on Saturday night. Port Adelaide haven't had the access. Port fans don't want to hear that, but that's the facts.
Yeah, well, he was booed off halfway through the year, and they were wondering whether they were actually going to get to finals when the Lions smashed them at Adelaide Oval. So I think Ken is quite clearly a very good coach. He hasn't proved himself to be a great coach because he hasn't been able to get them through that prelim hurdle. 4 losses from 4 prelims, and to get into 4 prelims in that time is a pretty good effort. And even this year might be as good as any to be able to get that group with the injuries that they had into a prelim. But Chris, coming back, I mean, Chris Scott, who we say is the best contemporary coach alongside Damien Hardwick, 9 prelims, but he's only won 3. So the fact that he's been able to go and turn those 3 prelim wins into two premierships out of 3 grand finals is a fair effort, and it's an excellent effort. But Ken just hasn't been able to finish off in those last couple of weeks, and sometimes that comes down to a little bit of luck. But there has been some floggings in there as well. They went in tired, they went in undermanned, and they were beaten by the team that we saw as the best team through the home and away for the most part.
Do you get what you deserve in finals, Bucks? And what do I mean by that?
What do you mean?
Well, if you're getting carried out of a nightclub at the end of July, Is that the ideal preparation for you to have your best final series that you possibly can? And I'm clearly talking about Tyson Stengel with his disastrous prelim final performance on the weekend. Am I reading too much into the fact that if you don't prepare yourself as best as you possibly can throughout the season, that you will eventually get found out? Same could probably be said for Callum Mills. Like if you're wrestling on Mad Monday and you pop your shoulder out and you miss 6 months of football and training, and then you do your hamstring on the eve of the finals, do you not get what you deserve a little bit, or is that been harsh?
No, I understand exactly what you're saying. The old school us would say that you can't leave any stone unturned to be the best version of yourself, but Stengel had a pretty good qualifying final. So
they all did.
Yeah. Well, so you can have a poor game here and there. And I think that I think Stengel was pretty quiet on the weekend, but I get absolutely where you're coming from. I think it's more fodder for us. I think it just makes it easy to criticise. Only the internal.
Well, it's worthy.
It didn't go far, did it?
It's worthy of criticism.
Why didn't that get further? It's sort of
because
Geelong were able to to put a blanket on that, weren't they?
That was it. The way that Geelong handled it and came out and supported him. I think Dangerfield was reasonably strong on it, but being supportive as well. So maybe it was the way that Geelong do things pretty well.
Do we just, as clubs now, do all they need to do now is throw out the mental health card and we back off a little bit?
Yeah, well, you'd hope not. You'd hope there's a bit more honesty than that. And
but I think mental and emotional health, and as I was talking about earlier, without getting too big on it, the dehumanisation of the athletes, and we forget that they are there to be judged for their performance and their professional. I suppose what they put out in a professional setting, but they're not perfect underneath all of that. But we especially with these young men, they're not. Ginnivan's probably a case in point. I mean, he has to, and it's great that he's come out and saying, "Well, I need to grow up," and he does in some ways.